Hi everyone, this is Mr. Morrow. I am here to teach you how to create, manage, rename everything that has to do with profiles regarding the RetroTINK 4K. The RetroTINK 4K is an advanced scaler, so it's highly recommended that you go ahead and go to the RetroTINK wiki that will be linked in the description, as well as visit the RetroTINK Discord, also will be linked in the description that I'm going to mention a few times. The wiki is really good because it has all of the features that you might need and is going to have everything that you will need to learn to use the RetroTINK 4K efficiently. But today, really just going over some quirks about profiles and how to use them and how to start doing everything. But before, well, not before, the thing you need to know about profiles is that profiles are included with the RetroTINK 4K, and it makes using it, a lot of the profiles that are included with the SD card at stock is going to be very, very useful if you have a lot of consoles and you think that you might need something. And of course, people are making new profiles all the time, so you should take a look out for any new profiles that people put out, especially people like Firebrand X or Wobbling Pixels. And especially with new firmware updates, you never know when a feature can be used that they might update their profile, or a feature can be used that can create profiles that have have used features that were not used before. So not even going to go straight to the RetroTINK 4K. It's there in the background. But the first thing that I want to go over is essentially just managing profiles when you start. And that just begins with taking the SD card out. Even you can take it out. You can take the SD card out when the RetroTINK is on. There will give a SD card removed notification on the top right. So let's go ahead and plug the SD card into the computer. I already have a window open, but let's plug in mine. And you are going to see that when you plug in the SD card, let's put this half and half. When you plug in the SD card, what you're going to see is a bunch of folders, some instructions, and also a firmware file and an update file. These are all going to be very important. Right now, I'm running firmware number version 1.1, which is current to right now. But what I'm actually going to do right now is erase everything here. I do have it backed up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to download the original SD card that came with the RetroTINK 4K. And you can do that by going into the RetroTINK Discord. And then you are going to go ahead and hit RT4K SD card. This SD card here, this download, is going to have the original SD card version. And once you click it, it'll take you to a page. You click it again, you get an initiated download. And once you do download that, this gives you RT4K 1.0 release candidate 26. So it has a bunch of the same files as before, but what we're going to do is we are going to move all of these files over to the SD card. And once that's over, you have all of these files. By the way, if I haven't mentioned this, it's recommended that you use a 32 gigabyte SD card that's formatted in FAT32. That's formatted in FAT32 so that you can go ahead and use that. If you are having trouble with your SD card and it is the stock SD card that came out with the first batch, it's for the best. You just go ahead and replace it with another SD card, and that should go ahead and clear up a lot of issues. But now that we're here, let's go ahead and take a look at the contents. So here is the firmware file. This firmware file is what the RetroTINK 4K uses to run, and there's also an update file. These two files always should come in pairs almost every time. You use this to, you use one to update the RetroTINK, and then the other one is what the RetroTINK uses to automatically turn on to its firmware version. CSC, and let's go through the folders. CSC is where you're going to find some color change information, and this is if you load up Game Boy interface, just as an example, it is going to change the colors so that it matches these various consoles, and you can use them for things other than Game Boy interface. It's just this is one of the things that you would mostly use them for. Then the next folder is going to have a bunch of BMP files, a bunch of bitmap files, and these are all our images for banners for profiles. Each profile can have a banner link to it, and a lot of these are going to be banners that give information about what they're doing. Just as an example, Firebrand X has made an NES banner showing that it is an NES that uses SCART. And just as another example, this is Wobbling Pixels profile. He is using this for an HDMI input for an Xbox that does 480p, 720p, 1080i, and gives the information for what it scales. Okay, now input modes is for creating not a profile, but just letting the RetroTINK know that it should have separate information for a specific input, that input for the HDMI. Masks is where you are going to keep all of these mask files that are going to be used for processing and special effects. A lot of them are used to mimic the look of some CRTs. Mode lines is going to have the custom output resolutions that you are going to have for the RetroTINK-4K. It comes with 4. You'll see what they are when I flash it. And before we go into profiles, there is also a folder called Profile, Custom Instructions, and Info. This is going to have all of the information you need for a lot of the profiles. There should be more if you ever update profiles, and you might find them in other places. But just as an example, you might find Wobbling Pixels, GameCube video, GC video, instructions, and he's going to tell you what it is that you need to do. Okay, so profiles. The stock SD card is organized by console, and then you can go ahead into a folder. For example, let's do Nintendo Wii. You go into the Nintendo Wii folder, and then that folder should have the name of the creator and the connection to expect for the profile. And the connection to expect for the profile is very important because it will automatically go to this connection, and it has this profile. These profiles have more than likely been keyed in and optimized for that specific connection. So you should not expect to use a YPBPR profile for a SCART connection, and you should not, or rather an RGB SCART connection, and you should not, and vice versa. If something is tuned to S-Video, do not expect it to work through HDMI. And these are all just examples. Personally, there is one exception to that, and that is the CRT emulation profiles. These profiles have been made across all inputs, across all inputs. So what this means is someone went in and created a look for a certain CRT. Just as an example, someone made, here, let's use HDR optimized masks and scan lines. Someone used, no, not this one. Sorry, CRT model emulation. Just as an example, Kuroho'o made a bunch of profiles. Just as an example, he made one that looks like a Sony KV-FV310. So some Sony Trinitron, some Toshiba sets, and some JVC sets. These are made to mimic those CRTs, and so they are going to work across different inputs. But otherwise, normally do not expect that unless the person who created the profile explicitly states, maybe in instructions or in a video or something, that it works for multiple inputs. Now that we're here and we've gone over that, these are a lot of folders, a lot of consoles. So one of the reasons I like to take a look at the SD card before starting up the RetroTINK is I can take a look at this and delete profiles and folders that I think I'm not going to use, because again, these are a ton of profiles and I don't think it's for the best to have all of these, especially because it's going to be more to scroll through. So let's go through these. And I'm just going to click on everything that I don't have. So example, I don't have any of these arcade machines, which are listed here. Okay, no Atari Jaguar, no Fujitsu. I don't have an Xbox. I don't have these NEC consoles. I don't have an NES. I'm not going to use a Wii U or a Retro USB. Don't have Sega consoles or Neo Geo consoles. And when it comes to the Sonys, I have a PS1 and a PS2, and I do not have a PSP, but I do have a PlayStation TV. So let's go ahead and erase those. Yes, I want to delete these. And then when you go in, you may see some additional files. Just for example, Analog Pocket, you click in and you say, okay, the Analog Pocket connects currently through HDMI. So, and the only profiles here are for playing Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color games. Classic mini consoles. Here is the Famicom, Super Famicom, Super NES, and the NES. I have all of these. And these are for 9x scale, and then you have the same ones for 10x scale, which has a little bit of then that has a little bit of the signal cut off. I kind of enjoy that actually, just to get the pixels to be a little bit chunkier. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and delete the 9 times scale versions, just because I already know that I don't want those. GameCube. If you look into GameCube, just as an example, you have GC Video, all of these profiles use GC Video, and I have GC Video adapters, so I'm going to keep these. This is another GC Video one. All of these are GC Video. The only ones that are not GC Video are these two, and it looks like these are for the GameCube component cables. I do not own those, so I'm going to delete these. Don't need them. And I see here that there are 2 GBI folders. Maybe you want both just to test around. But essentially, you're looking at what a typical folder looks like. You want to prune whatever you think you don't need. The SD cards will always be around, so you can grab the profiles if you'd like afterwards. So you can do that. And of course, in every folder, you might also find instructions. It's a really good idea to read those instructions before starting up a profile, so that you can have an idea of what that profile does. Let's keep going. All of these N64 profiles are going to be for RGB. My N64 is not RGB modded, it is S-Video stock. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this N64 folder. Looking at Super Nintendo, I do have HD Retrovision cables, but I don't use them anymore, so I'll go ahead and delete this. And then you've got RGB, and I see here, and I'm going to use this as an example because my Super Nintendo is here. I see that Wobbling Pixels has made something called a Razor Sharp profile and Sharp profile, and look at that. He has created a file called Wobbling Pixels Sharp versus Razor Sharp Differences. Sharp profiles, they provide a correct display aspect ratio, as you would see on a correctly calibrated CRT television. A little loss in image sharpness compared to Razor Sharp profiles. Razor Sharp profiles, integer scale and square pixels. So it is not going to have, it's going to be 1-to-1. It's not going to look correct compared to the direct aspect ratio, display aspect ratio, Sharp profiles. So I do like display aspect ratio profiles. I do not think I want square pixel profiles, so I can go ahead and get rid of this razor sharp profile. Okay, so there's that one. Here is something for the Nintendo Switch. I personally play Nintendo Switch online all the time, but as I told you before, I don't like the 9x scale. I like having the overscan missing, because just so I can get sharper pixels. So let's go ahead and delete these 9x profiles, and I have all the profiles I would want in the 10x that I would like. And these Nintendo Wii profiles, I see here that he has a display aspect ratio 4:3 for wobbling pixels, display aspect ratio 16:9, and profile information. So these are for NTSC and PAL GameCubes, output in 4K, and for YPBPR Nintendo component cables. Can be used with any other component cable as well. So that's good. I have that. I can keep these. And I did make some myself for playing on Virtual Console. So let's just go ahead and take out these 9x, these 9x scales. And I also see that there's a basic profile. The basic profile is telling you where to start, especially for YPBPR. This is actually just the display aspect ratio 4:3 sharp profile, just extracted to make it a little bit easier to find so that you go ahead and start there. But yeah, like this is what you might want to do. Let's see, I have a PlayStation, but I don't have HD Retrovision for that. And I'm boring you a little bit with this profile management file erasing, because this is something that you really want to do before you do anything with a profile. Would you do anything with the RetroTINK-4K, just to make your life a little easier so that you also don't get shocked by the amount of options there might be. I know for a fact that these are sharp and razor sharp. You know the differences between them already. Personally, I don't have a PAL. I don't have a PAL PlayStation, so these can both go. These are mostly made to be usable with NTSC and PAL. And I like Firebrand X's work for some of these, so this gives me what I need. Oh, but he does have display aspect ratio and sharp at 9x. So let's go ahead and delete those. Yeah, so you get the gist at this point. So this is my SD card. Let's go ahead and eject that. Oh, it's currently in use. Let's close this and bring up the Discord again. Okay, let's go ahead and eject the SD card. And just as examples, I'm going to use my Nintendo Switch and my Super Nintendo today. But now that the SD card is inserted, we can get rid of the computer display, and we're taking a look at the Wii. So now that we've gone ahead and managed our profiles, deleted a bunch of profiles that we didn't want, let's take a look and see something. Let's go and take a look and see some of the quirks of profiles. So you press the profile button on the remote. That'll bring up the profiles menu. You have the option to load from file or load the default. You have the option to save your current profile or save as new. And you also have options for saving profiles to buttons and also saving a power up profile. So here's what we're gonna do. Let's load a profile. I'm already on the Nintendo Switch. So just pretending, let's go ahead and take a look at a Game Boy game. And my Nintendo Switch is already set to play these NSO games in a way that the profile's like. This is something that I did in a previous video, so take a look at that. But I'm playing Game Boy on the Nintendo Switch. Let's see if there's a profile for that. You definitely saw that there was, but let's just pretend that we are looking at it for the first time, even though we shouldn't. Let's go ahead and load profile. I'm playing on the Nintendo Switch. Let's go to Nintendo Switch. And I see here that I have Mr. Morrow NSO profiles while I'm playing an NSO game. Let's take a look. and there is a Game Boy Color 15X profile. That's great. So I'm going to select this profile, and it looks as good as it can. But there's no scan lines, and I'm about to turn on scan lines. So if you're watching this in a theater mode or a smaller window, I am recording this in 1080p. So let's actually switch this to 1080. Well, the first thing you need to know about profiles is that all the profiles that are included output to 4K. So that's something that you should watch out for. Here it is, 2400 by 2160. That's 4K vertical resolution. Let's go ahead and switch this to 1080p and see how that looks. Oh, no, it's slightly off because of some quirks from before. So let's fix that. Okay. But like I said, let's go ahead and switch this over to 1080p and see how this works out. So I went ahead, switched it over. Okay, this looks pretty good. It's a 7 times. This profile was set up in such a way, this particular profile was set up in such a way that you could switch resolutions at any time, and it will, because of the way it was set up, and it will automatically adjust for a different resolution. So let's say I like playing in 1080p because I stream in 1080p, but I want scan lines. And as I mentioned, I'm going to turn on scan lines. The best thing you can do right now is full screen your video so that you can see the scan lines to their full effect. Let's go ahead and switch to LCD RGB. These are pretty good scan lines. I do like this. I like the way this looks. And let's do one more thing. Let's make sure that we go into advanced settings. Let's go into the deinterlacer film. And I see that LCD blending is on. This is great. So I love all of these, and I don't want to do anything else. And I love the fact that it currently outputs in 1080p, which, as you can see there, it outputs 1080p 60. So what we're going to do, we are going to save current, and all the changes that I've made will be on this profile from now on. So every time I load the Game Boy Color 15X profile, it will automatically have the scan line set, and it will automatically have 1080p 60 as output. And that means that's great. But let's say that I wanted to do something really weird, but I wanted to save both profiles. Let's go ahead and, I don't know. Let's say I wanted to use mono scan lines. These are not colored at all. These are just black lines around the pixels. I can go ahead, but I want both of them. So let's go ahead and save this as new. Great. This has created a new profile 0, and this is going to be created in the profile folder. And because I like these two so much, let's go ahead and assign button 1 to this profile, and then assign button 2 to new profile 0. Great. But let's say right now we wanted to play Super Nintendo. Okay. So let's go ahead. Well, let's say for whatever reason I wanted to play Super Nintendo. Here's what I would not do. My Super Nintendo is currently connected through the SCART port. So if I load a profile, I would not go to the Nintendo Wii folder, see that there is a YPBPR folder, which are normally the rear RCA jacks, and load up this generic Wii profile. It's currently switching out to things. So here it says RCA YPBPR no signal. And what that means is that it is currently on the rear component ports. It is not reading from the SCART cable. Why? So there's no reason for me to do that. I'm just showing you what happens. Now, I know that if this is a YPBPR, it probably was not optimized for use on SCART. So it is not a good idea to load up a profile that is not for this console, and then switch to RGSB or RGBS. And that is because when you load up the Super Nintendo, when you load up the Super Nintendo, and I apologize, it's dark right now. I have to reset here, I'll reset this for you. And that is because it is currently using generic default information. Oh, it's, why is that like that? Oh, this is for the, this is tuned to the Wii, by the way. So 3432 is not the information that's used for the Wii. Used for the Super Nintendo. It is currently used for the Wii. And that means that I'm playing unoptimized. I'm playing on unoptimized profiles. What I do want to do is load a Super Nintendo profile. And I see here Firebrand X has an RGBS profile. That's great. That's what I said from previous. Click that. And let's say I want display aspect ratio 10x. That looks much brighter. That looks much better. However, we're not done yet because every profile is tuned to the console the profile maker was using. So we do have to do two things to make sure that we are getting the most out of our profile. And the first thing is that we want to adjust the gain. And this is going to be set for my particular console. I know that Firebrand X was probably not using a one-chip Super Nintendo because his pre-ADC was much higher than mine, was at 0 instead of negative 0.1. And now that we're here, let's go ahead and increase these. And I do go over optimizing Super Nintendo profiles, so this is going to just be a crash course. But now that I've loaded the profile, I'm going to also run autophase. And even though it is automatically sampling, so it is doing the decimation phase automatically for me, if I run autophase, it is currently going to run the subphase, and that is going to definitely optimize it for my particular console. So now this profile is optimized for my personal Super Nintendo. So just so that I never have to personally do this again, I'm going to go to Profile, and I'm going to save current. And this is going to save every time I load this Super Nintendo profile, I know that it is tuned to my particular Super Nintendo. I do like this profile, so let's go ahead and go to button 3. And we are going to go to the Super Nintendo, Firebrand X, Super Nintendo, display aspect ratio 10x. So, again, like I said, I love this. This is great. So now I have 3 profiles. I have 3 profiles on the remote buttons. I have Game Boy Color. I have a Game Boy Color that needs to be renamed. And then I finally have Super Nintendo display aspect ratio 10x. So if I press the 1 button on the remote, what it's going to do is switch to 1080p, switch the input to the switch, and now I'm looking at the switch. But what if I press the number 2 on it? Well, it is also going to switch the switch, but it's switching this time to the mono LCD scan line instead of the LCD colored one. And if I press 3, it automatically is going to switch the 4K, and it is going to output to my Super Nintendo. While we're here on the Super Nintendo profile, let me just show you something. Unlike the Game Boy one, which is explicitly made to scale at different resolutions, you see here that everything is currently tuned to be used at this current resolution at 240p to 4K. Let's go ahead and press the 1080p button, and you're going to see what happens. As you can see, it looks a lot skinnier, and that is because this profile was tuned for 4K. It was not tuned for 1080p. It looks stretched. It does not look correct. And so we should not use this profile unless you want to put in the work yourself for a 1080p output. You should not use this profile. You can use it as a starting point because it has all of the samples per line and the subphase and everything keyed into my console, and everything else is keyed in. So it's a good starting point, but if you don't want to do that, then it's not recommended that you start with a 4K profile and then go to 1080p because the scaling is going to be wrong. So let's go ahead and press 3 to load up this profile as it was before. And now it's in 4K again, and it looks correct. And so that's the first quirk of profiles. Now, again, I mentioned this previously. There are one set of profiles that have been made for every input, and these are going to be the CRT profiles. Someone went in and keyed in what a CRT would look like for every single input on the RetroTINK-4K. So let's go ahead and try this Super Game Boy RGB LCD. And let's take a look at what this was on. This was on, what is the scaling here? This is supposed to be for a 4K profile. And this is for playing on a Super Game Boy. Let me not load this one. Apologies. Let's do Consumer Trinitron. Let's do that. So when you look at this, it is also a 4K profile, but it is currently keyed into the It is currently keyed into the Oh, this is a little weird. I'm not understanding this myself. So let's try one more time. CRT emulation. Okay. This is one of the things I wanted to talk about. So as you can see, it says HD15 RGBS, no signal. I am using RGBS, however, not the HD15. This is the VGA port's RGBS signal. So what I can do in this case, and these are specifically for the CRT profiles, I want to hit the input button and select the input that I'm currently using, which is RGBS through SCART. And as you can see, there are already some scanline effects that have been built in. If you want to mimic the scanlines from the RetroTINK 5X, this is a good place to start because it is not broken down into the different effects like it was in the RetroTINK 5X. But you do want to use that. If you want to use something similar to that, start with CRT emulation and look at the CRT model emulation. And again, this works not only for the RetroTINK 4K's SCART input. This should also be used for the HDMI input. Let's switch to that. Okay, so this doesn't look right. Actually, it does look correct. Let's see. But the scanline effects are not big enough, and there is a reason for that. So that is because the scanlines were made, these were made for slower resolutions. So since I know that, I'm going to go ahead and turn up the prescale. I'm going to go to the ADC menu and turn up input pixels. And as you can see, now that I've done that, it sort of looks a little bit more like a CRT. I might be able to go a little bit further. Let's try that. Okay, this doesn't look the best, but it doesn't look the worst either. I see here that I have a perfect 10 times scale for everything, and the scan lines and everything are actually pretty thick. Let's try loading a... This is probably not going to look correct because it's a Super Nintendo game, and that's a 4 times scale instead of a 5. So let's readjust. Okay, so it doesn't look the best, doesn't look the worst. I see this is square pixels here, but it's still doing something with the CRT effects. And this is about the resolution of a Super Nintendo game anyway, so let's not really mess around with it anymore and use it as stock. But let's say that I like this and I like using this particular profile, and let's go ahead and switch this, make this number 4. Oh, actually, before I do that, let's save this as a new profile. This is going to be my profile number 1. and great. So I say this is a new profile, and let's say I want to use this again, but for whatever reason, I want to just go to the CRT emulation again and load that up. Let's say I was using this Sony one, but I'm already here, and I want to see what these look like with scan lines. Well, I'm going to go ahead and click this, but my picture disappears, and that's because the input does not stay between profiles. The profile saves the last known input that it uses, and every time you load up that profile, it is going to stick to that input. So if I did want that, I would have to hit button number 4 because that is where this is stored. Okay, great. So I've created profiles. I've saved some profiles. I've overwritten a few old ones. And so what else can I do? Well, I see here that these profiles are new profile 0 and new profile 1. So I do want to rename them. Unfortunately, the RetroTINK-4K does not let you rename profiles on the machine, but that is what the SD card reader is for. So let's take it out. And we are going to connect the SD card. We're going to connect the SD card again. And go into the profile folder. I see here that my new profile 0 and new profile 1 are here. And I do see here that we also have profile instructions. So let's open this and take a look at what it says. It says how many profiles you can have, and they can rename on a PC or reorganize as desired. Profile map stores the remote assignments as well as the power profile. Temp_back is a backup of our current profile in case loading profiles fail. And it tells you something that I went over with you. When you use a new profile with an analog input, you should use the RGB gain and phase buttons on the remote to tune that to your particular display, and then overwrite the profile by saving current, and that will tune it to your setup. Okay, cool. So I know that, and I know that this first profile was the GBC mono profile. So let's rename this. Let's just name it something simple like GBC switch mono, and this new profile number 1 is going to be Sony, the Sony FV310 Super NES RGB. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the profile map and see what that looks like. Oh, no, this is not going to work because this is not a normal file type. That's fine. It's just going to name what the numbers are. But let's go ahead. I'm going to leave these here just so that I can find them a little bit more easily. Instead of moving them around, and let's take a look at what this looks like. It says SD card inserted once more, so we can start reading from the SD card. Let's take a look at what is here in the profiles. So I see 2 of my profiles are gone, and that is because I renamed them. No worries. I can go ahead and hit GBC switch mono and find that. And then for this one, I can go ahead and save this as the Sony FV310 Super Nintendo RGBS. Cool. That's everything you should need to know about profiles. We created them. We have messed around with some that are already there. And we've gone ahead and managed some of them, renamed them, as well as assigned them to the map. The only thing left is, say, for example, I want to start playing my Nintendo Switch again with this exact profile. Let's go ahead into the profiles, go down to power up, and hit Sony FV310 Super NES RGB. And what that's going to do is every time I power up the RetroTINK, it is going to go to this exact profile upon first powering up. Cool. Before we test that, let's talk about updating your RetroTINK. So as I showed you before, I left my RetroTINK on, but I moved in two new files, and these are going to move us back to the release profiles. So if I want to apply that, we can go ahead into OSD firmware, go down to check SD card, and it is going to give us that I can update to version 1.0. System will automatically reboot. So I'm going to say OK. Right now, the RetroTINK is currently updating. And you're going to see your RetroTINK flash a couple lights. Purple means that it is currently looking for and updating. Sorry, it is currently looking for and setting the new firmware file. Blue means that it is actually installing the profile. Once it hits white, it is currently booting up. And then when it hits green, that means it is finished booting up, and you'll see the signal in a second. And there it is. Like I said, whenever we boot up, it switches to my last save profile. So let's actually do something that is not recommended. First, let's go ahead and switch to my Game Boy Color profile on the RetroTINK-4K. Oh, no. All right, that's button number 1. So if I press button number 1, that is going to switch to a 1080p output. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, because I'm playing on the Switch right now. Let's actually switch over to my Super Nintendo. Sorry. Great. Great. So we've switched over to my Super Nintendo. Cool. And we're currently on version 1.0. Let's take out the SD card. And what we're going to do is I want to update to the newest, or to a different RetroTINK 4K profile. Sorry, RetroTINK firmware. Here's the SD card. Let's go ahead and in the RetroTINK Discord, I see here that there is an experimental firmware channel. And that there is a 1.1.0. And this can be considered an official stable release. Let's go ahead and download this. This is my third time downloading this, and I see here that I have 2 files to update the RetroTINK 4K with. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to move over the firmware file by itself, and I am going to delete the old firmware file because I do not need this anymore. I want to update to the new one, but I'm not going to update the update file. After I eject my SD card, I'm going to go ahead, plug in the current I'm going to plug in the SD card one more time, and I'm going to apply the firmware update again. All right, so let's go to the OSD menu, go to check SD card. All right. Oh, that's really weird. It says version 1.0 again. I want it to update to 1.1. Whatever. It's fine. I'll update anyway. Now, I'm currently updating the RetroTINK 4K with the original firmware in like a fake scenario, and it has the newest firmware file in it. And when you finish, it is going to start, after it flashes blue, is actually going to flash yellow. And flashing yellow means that it is the current installed firmware is missing its firmware file. So I currently have the install for 1.0, but the firmware file is for 1.1. There's a mismatch, and so at this point, it is just going to flash yellow, and then it's going to turn off, and you might see a faint red glow. That just means that it's off. So how do you fix that? Well, it's not not too much to worry about. Take the SD card out. We're going to go ahead and plug it back in. And as I mentioned, it is missing these files are mismatching. The files are mismatching. So what you want to do is go into the newest or any firmware update file. It's going to always have a pair. You want to move both to the SD card. It's going to ask you to replace files. Just go ahead and replace the files. And I have both the update file and the firmware file for 1.1 installed. Let's go ahead, eject this. Now, how do you install an update without the unit being on? Well, on the back of the unit, there is a button. This blue button, it's called reset. This is the reset button. Now, what you can do is it's hard for me to press it with just my finger, so I like to use a pen. Actually, I have it depressed right now. So while you're pressing it, go ahead and turn the unit on. Did not do it. All right. And when you do that, that is the second way to start installing firmware updates. It's currently looking for it and installing it. And there it is in blue. And now it is white. It will soon turn green. And it will boot to my last power-up profile, which was the Nintendo Switch one with the CRT look on it. And so that was it. That is the second way to update. And now that I have everything updated, it should look really good. And that is it for this video. I've gone ahead and shown you how to manage profiles and how to manage the firmware updates and different firmwares. So if you have any other questions, you're more than welcome to look at any other videos that might give tutorials for the RetroTINK-4K. You can also go to the RetroTINK wiki, which will have all the information you need. And finally, you're always welcome to join the RetroTINK Discord. And hang around. I'm there a lot. There are a bunch of other people who are very familiar with the RetroTINK-4K who might be able to answer some questions, but I hope that this video was very helpful. So I will see you later.